You said in Islam only prisoners of war are slaves, then mentioned hadith on reward for releasing or freeing slaves. You went on to say the number of slaves become less and less over time. Also, you mentioned that if the slave owner had a child who is his slave, the child is not a slave. An important point you did not highlight: a slave that gave birth to a child of the owner would have to be freed eventually or something like that. I don't remember. If two slaves had a child, was that child a slave or not? Question mark. Okay, before going forward with this comment, just to put in context, if you have watched the previous video, you should know by now what this is all about. If you are new, hopefully you watch the previous videos, because this is a continuation from the several videos of the past. As you see here, it is number 11, point number 11. So this YTSALTTV1056 have started the comment and point form of the paragraph until now. We are at number 11, and in the previous video I have read this paragraph, and then I did not have the time to fully address whatever is mentioned. Hence this video. We will start from number 11 onwards as time permits, inshallah. So the whole topic of discussion is about morality. Is it relative? Is it, how does Islam see morality? And 2 point of contention, I would say, is the marriage, quote unquote child marriage, back to the marriage of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Aisha, and how do we see marriage to young girls or child in Islam. That's number one. Number two is about slaves, the ownership of slaves, etc., etc. What is the moral from the perspective of Islam, right? So now we are here. So he mentioned several things that I implied or I mentioned, and we go on from what. So we'll read through, because in the previous comment he suggested that I should read through the whole paragraph before commenting, because otherwise the first video that I did, for every line I read, I react and I comment, the video will become 1 hour plus. Yeah, 1+ hour, right? So it becomes lengthy because of how I approach it. So he said read the whole paragraph and then comment. So we'll do that. So we have read until this point here. Looking at history, it is a fact that slavery did not become less and less in the caliphate. Prisoners of war are not the only halal source of slaves. Prisoners of war were the group of people Muslims were allowed to take away their rights and make them slaves. Besides this, the Muslim could not make random people slaves, but Muslims were allowed to go to slave markets and purchase slaves, people they did not go to war with, people captured and put into slavery by non-Muslims. This is non-Muslim, right? Anyway, Muslims could go to Egypt and purchase slaves there. This is why I highlighted that the slave from Egypt was not a prisoner of war. He did not talk about her at all. Why was she a slave and owned by the Prophet when she clearly was not a prisoner of war? Question mark. I don't know if you are familiar with the Arab slave trade. It boomed and provided workforce for the caliphate. Muslims would just purchase captured Africans from slave trade, no question asked. This was allowed. Slavery was banned in the Arabian Peninsula in the 1960s. So, the claim that it was slowly ending slavery is not true. Other nations had to force the Muslim to end slavery. So, when I ask if slavery is moral or not based on the morals of God, there are no categories. I would be referring to people who are not captives of war and the captives of war because to God it is all the same slavery. Alright, I think I remember that I mentioned when the Sharia of Islam comes about with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, in the larger context, he is the last and final prophet. Every different prophet have their own Sharia, meaning the jurisprudence for that time, right? And then with the last and final prophet, of course, the fiqh, the jurisprudence, the law, is for from that point onwards until the end, right? Okay. Now, the Sharia have to deal with two things, right? Meaning that what is already the state of the world, and there are certain things that is being banned, there are certain things that is slowly reduced, etc., right? And even for those things that were banned, for example like alcohol, there are process that went through from the beginning until at the end it was totally banned, right? So I'm quite certain you are familiar with this. So going back to the issue of the slave, when I said, let me check here, when I said that the only way Islamically that someone end up become slaves, hopefully for those who just watch this video and not the previous one, the context I have explained in the previous one, meaning in terms of the wording of the slave, and if you imagine slave, suddenly you imagine something. In Islam, the concept might be not even close to what you imagine based on what you know slave from elsewhere, right? So I have touched upon that is in the previous videos. So now the issue here is that he said is still the issue is even though okay, let me backtrack. What I said is with the fact that number one, how one end up to become slave is just because of captive of war. And when we say captive of war, generally we are talking about the soldier themselves, right? The soldier themselves. It's not like when we go and open up a new country, or how to say, liberate a new country, or a new region become under the Islamic rule of law. There's no such thing as the whole of the population become slaves. It's only those soldiers, those who are directly involved in the battle, right? Because all of those people is just civilians, right? So that's number one that we can see. So that's number one, meaning that only those category can become slave under the ruling. Number two, they are how to say, when I said reward being given, and hence it is become general motivation for people to just release the slave. There are many type of reward or motivation for people to release the slave into becoming the normal citizen, right? The normal citizen. So if that, meaning what I stated was, theoretically, if you combine those facts and the Sharia, we should see the slave quote unquote over time become less and less and become not even a thing. Generally speaking, that would be expected result. But then you will say that historically that is not what happened, and you point out that slaves, that is not as a result of Muslim. There are slaves that made slave by others, other how to say, other empire, other civilization. So from the construct of the society, they are already slaves at that point, right? So when Islam interact with that, it is interacting with reality, right? So yeah, from that perspective, I'm not sure whether you are, how to say, you are of the opinion that God should straightway say, no, this is banned, so whoever is already a slave, suddenly he becomes free, etc., right? Are you proposing that is, or that should have the better alternative than the Sharia deal with the reality? Those are slaves, they are still slaves, but their rights as slave in Islam will totally drastically change from whatever. I'm not sure whether they even have rights in other civilization in terms of they are being a slave, right? So there are changes, but if you want to say, okay, my point about the number is reducing, if, okay, because the time frame that we are discussing based on history, right, is that the other civilization is still having their own thing. So they are still capture people and make slave, right? So in Islam, that should not be allowed from that perspective, right? I hope you agree this. But once they already is slave, and then when the Islamic civilization interact with this, it interact with that reality. And as we point out, when someone is already a slave, in that interaction they are just a slave. That perspective, right? I think both of us are already agreed from before that in Islam, a free man, a normal citizen, or a slave, in the eyes of God, it is not, those are not ranking or hierarchy or how noble you are, right? In the eyes of God, as you know, Bilal ibn Rabah, one of the slaves from Habshah, right? He is one of the name that we know until now for like the one of the biggest contribution towards Islam, right? And we know even Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, indicated that he is one of the people in heaven, etc., right? So I believe that we understand that already, right? But we are now discussing about the social construct, the rules of law in terms of interacting in this world. I think we have to discuss even more here. You should, because I'm not sure how to go into that discussion. What would you think to be the better alternative that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made a sharia that would make this topic a better one in terms of historically? If we imagine, right? If we imagine, because what went in the history is that Islam, the empire of Islam grow and grow and grow to a certain point, and then it shrink back again until now it becomes small nation state of Muslim majority country, etc., right? But if you imagine, right, if Islamic civilization grow and it become the whole world, would you agree that with what I have said, right, eventually slavery will end? Would you agree with that conceptually? Of course, I do understand you brought up history, because in history, Islam, the civilization of Islam is doing its own thing, and it has to interact with whatever the other civilization is doing. And you are saying that the problem here is not what Islam is doing, but what the others is doing, that they even capture people to make slave. And Islamically, it wouldn't happen in Islamic civilization. It happen only elsewhere. But your problem is, when this is happening, and then this becomes slave, anyone becomes slave, when Islam civilization interact with this, it interact with them as slave, already slave and as slave, right? So you have the issue with that, right? Now, that is what history, historically what happened. Now I'm projecting, because this never happened, but if Islam actually spread until the whole world is Islam, would you agree, at least conceptually, eventually slavery will be zero? Generally speaking, hypothetically speaking, and conceptually speaking, meaning that with what we know, they will know, meaning once Islam become the whole world, there will no more war or battle that makes new slave, right? There will come a point where there's no new slave. Okay, what the slave that is there is only from what happened before. And with what we know about reward of freeing slaves, etc., eventually slavery will become a thing of the past. Would you agree on that point first, right? Is if Islam had becoming the whole world, slavery would eventually end. Would you agree with that or no? I assume you would, because your point is not about that, right? Your point is then before the hypothetical situation that I've mentioned just now would take place, before that there will be many that would be like a victim of whatever the other society been doing, capture them, make slave, and Islam do not address that. That was your issue, right? So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in terms of understanding the context. Now, if what I've stated is true, and I do not push aside the concern, there's a discussion of this. What is actually the ideal solution for them, really? Because once someone have become slave, and if you suddenly abruptly says, okay, now every slave becomes free man, is that the best possible scenario for each individual slave? Suddenly, they do not have someone, let's say an owner, to be responsible to feed them, to clothe them, to provide for them, etc., etc., etc. Right? In Islam, slaves have rights, and the owner that do not provide those rights is going to be answerable to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Right? They have to answer on whatever they have done. Right? So now, if you imagine someone who already is a slave, unfortunately, especially you are talking about those who are being victim of other civilization that take people and make slave. We are not talking about how Islam deals with things, others, right? And when Islam interact with this, they still are considered slave, right? But now they are becoming someone who had to be taken care of by their owner. So if suddenly the owner have to release abruptly, right? Do you think that is the best case scenario for everyone who suddenly have no one that is responsible to take care of them, and they are suddenly someone who have to take care of themselves? I'm not sure what is the circumstances for each, whether they have, you know, a roof over their head, etc., 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 right? Where at the starting point there, under Muslim ruling, of course, someone who have to provide them shelter, and suddenly they have to live on their own, right? So that is an interesting discussion if we want to go there, meaning that what is the best possible way of meaning hypothetically to deal with that scenario, if that is the focal point. Anyway, so that is point number 11. So we'll go to point number 12. Okay. Number 12, you ask why I brought up the issue of Aisha being his favorite wife. In the Quran, if a man was to have more than one wife, he had to treat them equally. The Prophet had a favorite, meaning no equal treatment. What? Okay, I will address because you say read the whole paragraph first. But I want to highlight this statement has a fallacy in it. Anyway, he spent more time at Aisha's home, resulting in jealous. If I remember correctly from the Sirah, most gifts were given to the Prophet end up being Aisha's home and not the other wives. Umar told his daughter to behave and be good wife to the Prophet because she wasn't his favorite, Aisha was. So other people could observe the special treatment Aisha got over the other wives. I hope you now understand why I brought it up. My point was this: he wasn't the model example of a husband with more than one wife. Allah's law to be fair and just to the wives, no favorites or special treatment to one wife. Is this what the Prophet did? Okay, if okay, the command of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is very clear, right? You must be just, but justice and equal treatment is not necessarily. It's like if we go broader, right? Men and women should be treated justly, right? Meaning we have to have justice between men and women. But justice between men and women does not mean exact same treatment. I think that's quite clear cut, right? Because the needs are different. The psychologically, etc., is different, right? So if you treat the same exact way, that is not necessarily justice. Okay, if we can understand that, going back to, for example, we have to be just with all our children. Does having one favorite, and when I'm talking for favorite, I'm talking about what's inside, right? Oh, this is my favorite child. The feeling, is that going against justice? No, that's just feeling. But if you treat someone worse than the other, if you do not give the rights of all, you only give the rights for some, and this one you do not do justice to them by not giving them their right, that is not justice. That is zalim, right? That's zalim. But if you already covered all, the justice, but somehow this one is my favorite, and maybe it's that emotional, psychological, whatever, you have favorite, that does not necessarily becoming an issue of justice. So I hope that is clear cut. Now, jealousy is also feeling. And even with children, right, we should do our best to be justice, and we should do justice. Having favorite, I have said earlier, does not necessarily mean but if you do have favoritism meaning that that's already an action, right? Having favorite is not zalim, but applying favoritism, meaning that you really do not do justice, then that's zalim, that's not justice. Jealousy can come from various aspects, and not all jealousy indicate directly in negative things, right? I think Aisha actually mentioned that she was jealous about Khadijah, the first wife of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sometimes said about Khadijah something that only Khadijah gave him, right? And Khadijah, of course, is special in that case, that she is the one, the first, she was the wife when Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam received revelation, first and foremost revelation, and she is the one that first backed Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when no one else is backing him, etc., etc., etc. And the daughters of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also comes from Khadijah. So Khadijah obviously have a special place in his heart as a human. And Aisha always heard about Khadijah from the Prophet, right? And sometimes she get jealous of Khadijah. So those words, when you say jealous, it doesn't imply that Prophet Muhammad SAW did something wrong. It's just human nature that, oh, I'm quite jealous of that. So if that is the level that we're talking about, we are not talking about injustice. We're just talking about human dynamic. But if you are talking about, because so here, right? Of course, you have to specify specific hadith if you want to pinpoint something that is directly mentioned that indicate something that you see as a problem, right? So I cannot just speculate right now of what exactly are you talking about, and does this statement meaning how do you get he spend more time at Aisha's home resulting jealous, right? Are you implying that he violated the rotation? Because one of the thing when you have multiple wives, to do justice, there's you have to abide by the rotation, etc., right? So that's the general ruling. Are you actually saying that Prophet Muhammad SAW did not do that? And if that is what you are saying, is there any hadith that can justify such statement? Okay, and here is also most gift given to Prophet ended up in Aisha's home. I'm not sure what kind of gift are you talking about. Is this gift to Prophet Muhammad SAW or gift to, because given to Prophet? So if something given to you, I'm imagining what you are saying here, is my belonging. I'm placing it at one of my house, because if I have multiple wives, so I have multiple house for each wife, right? So if I place it somewhere, one of the house, are you saying that that is injustice? Because I'm trying to understand where you have the idea of injustice, because that is the issue, right? Because unless you are not talking about justice, you are talking about directly treat them equally. Because if you're saying that treat them equally, you understand as treat them equally, that is a misunderstanding of that verse. Because in Islam, justice does not equal treat them equally, and we have to, unless you are talking about verses that is something else. But the point of the verse is to do justice, right? You cannot do injustice. So anyway, so I'm not sure what is this. If you have any hadith that you want to cite, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I do not see why I place my belonging at one of the house suddenly become an issue of me not doing justice. Umar told his daughter to behave and be good wife to the Prophet because she wasn't his favorite. Aisha was. Okay, again, you can cite the hadith to see if there's any issue of injustice, or it's just we are talking about human dynamics where, you know, human have favorite for one or the other reason, and as long as you do not go because of that favorite, meaning your inclination, you then do injustice. As long as that is not the case, it's still not a problem, right? It's more of how we interact with reality. So other people could observe the special treatment. I think I think this is the issue, right? Because, for example, if I already do justice to all my kids, but for one of my kids, visibly he seemed to get a bit extra because of something, right? For example, he's the special one, he has special need, etc. Because Aisha is the young, right? Meaning among the wife, she is young. So I'm not sure if if the whole of this discussion is about exact equal treatment, then I would discuss that first, because that resolve everything. But if you know, I mean justice, so is there any injustice that you see from any of this? Because if there's no injustice, it's just more of, you know, just the human dynamic, that why can't I have certain things, etc., right? I hope you now understand why I brought it up. Okay, so I think I get some glimpse of it, but I'm not sure if this is it hinge on this, right? So you can clarify perhaps. My point was this: he wasn't the model example. Okay, so this conclusion I think can only be okay, Allah's law, be fair and just. Okay, that's in the thing, right? So this one I agree. Based on Allah's law, you have to be fair and to be just. But initially you said treat them equally. So that's the thing. If you have the equation being just and fair treat equally exactly, then we have to discuss that first, because that resolves everything, right? But if you but if you think any of these somehow constitute injustice, then we can discuss on that level, right? So yeah, so that is number 12. So that's it for this one. That's number 13, I think. Where is it? Yeah, that's number 13. This will be in the next video, inshallah. Thank you for watching. See you next time.